Back in the early 90s, the Estevan Public Library had a writer-in-residence program, and one of the gentlemen who filled that position for a year was a guy by the name of Rod McIntyre. I really liked Rob. He was a nice guy, he was easy to visit with, and we ended up playing noon hockey together quite a bit, so we saw each other a lot. One day after we came off the ice, we got visiting in the dressing room, and Rod started talking about other things he liked to do, other sports he liked to play. He liked to play golf, and so we got talking about golf quite a bit. Back in the early 90s, I golfed a lot, and so we had that in common, and we talked golf and whatever. And then as the conversation went on, I asked him if he liked playing squash, and he said he loved playing squash, that he hadn't played a lot recently, but he would really like to play sometime. So we talked about squash quite a bit. As we were leaving the dressing room, he turns to me and says, well, we ought to get together and play sometime. So I said, okay, when would you like to do that? And he said, how about 6:30 tomorrow morning? Now, I'm not really excited about getting up to play sports early in the morning, but I thought, well, if that's what he wants to do, I'll do that. So I set my alarm for 6 o'clock and I got dressed and made my way over to the leisure center and got changed into my squash clothes, and I was waiting for him, hitting the ball around in the court for a while, and he was late. So I thought, well, maybe he's just running behind, so I waited a little while longer and he didn't show up. And I waited some more, and I waited some more. No Rod. So I eventually got changed and came to the office and did whatever I was doing that morning, and when noon hour came, I grabbed my hockey stuff and went back to noon hockey, and guess who shows up? Rod McIntyre standing there. So I say to him, Rod, where were you this morning? And he said to me, where were you? And I said, I was here. I was at the squash court. He said, I was at the golf course. I thought we had made arrangements to play squash. He thought we'd made arrangements to play golf. I often think about that story when I think about how people work together. If you do not communicate well, and more importantly, if you do not know what you are supposed to be doing, there is a very slight chance you're actually going to do the thing you're supposed to do. And it's something I see in the church quite often. Most people would love to do something. Most people have really good hearts. Most people want to be servants. They're just not sure what they're supposed to be doing, and because they don't know what they're supposed to do, they sometimes don't do much. So, this makes today's sermon even more important, because in Colossians chapter 2, the Apostle Paul tells us what his purpose was, what his goals were, what his aims were, what he would work on, what he's thinking about. And I think Paul's description of what his purpose is can give us some direction and give us some purpose as well, so we know what we ought to be up to. Chapter 1 of Colossians, Paul spent a great deal of time talking about what God has done. He talks a great deal about the gospel, and so that's the foundation. We aren't trying to earn anything. The gospel message says we've been given a gift. But Paul says there is something for us to do. There is work we can do, and so he outlines that work in Colossians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. And I'd like you to read along with me as we read that, and then we'll come back and look at the 3 things Paul says he is concerned about trying to accomplish. Here we go. He says, verse 1, I want you to know how much I struggle for you and for those at Laodicea, and for all who have not met me personally. My purpose is that they may be encouraged in heart and united in love, in order that they may know the mystery of God, namely Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. I tell you this so that no one may deceive you by fine-sounding arguments. For though I am absent from you in body, I am present with you in spirit, and delight to see how orderly you are and how firm your faith is. So he says, I am struggling for you, I am praying for you, I am working for you, I am trying to encourage certain things in you. And he says, I delight when I hear that these things are growing and being nurtured among you. These are the things that I care about. And he lists 3 of them. He says, my purpose right now for you and for me and for all that I work for, my purpose is, number 1, that you may be encouraged in heart. I'm a little surprised that that's the first thing in the list. I wouldn't put that his first goal is to encourage people. I wouldn't put that as high on the list as he does, but maybe that tells me that I misunderstand how important encouragement is. The fact of the matter is that our life will either shrink or expand based on our courage, based on what we think we can do, based on the stories that we tell ourselves. And so Paul says, I want you to be encouraged. I want you to tell yourselves good stories. I want you to dream big dreams. I want you to think that you can do something. Because when we tell the wrong stories and when we think the wrong things, we always get the wrong result. And we see that in Scripture, right? You'll remember that. In Exodus 32, you'll remember that Moses is up on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, and he's been there a while, and he hasn't been coming back. And so at the start of Exodus 32, the people are getting restless, and they start telling themselves the wrong story. They start saying to Aaron, they say, this man is not coming back. We have no idea where he has gone. We don't know when he's coming back. I don't think he's coming back. Therefore, make us a new leader. Make us a new God. Make us a golden calf, which he goes on and does. And he does that because their thinking is incorrect. They told themselves the wrong story. When you tell yourself the wrong story, you discourage yourself and you get the wrong result. You see that too in Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13 contains the story about the spies going to see the promised land. We sing the song with the little kids about the 12 men went to spy out Canaan. 10 were bad, but 2 were good, right? And you remember that 2, Joshua and Caleb, said, this is a beautiful land. We should go up and possess it. God is giving us a great blessing. But there were 10 of them that said, yeah, it's beautiful. It's flowing with milk and honey. It's the best place we've ever seen. But you know what? We also saw a lot of walled cities there, and we also saw some giants. And those giants were huge, and we looked like grasshoppers in their eyes, and there is no way we can do this. And they told themselves the story. There is no way we can do this. And so because they decided they couldn't do it, because they discouraged one another, because they discouraged the rest of the people, they couldn't do it. And ended up wandering around in the wilderness for the next 40 years. You'll remember that after the people of God were taken away to Babylon and brought back, Ezra gathers them up when they're finally back home, and he reads the law to them. And I think when Ezra reads the law to them, he wants them to know the rules and the laws and what God wants. But I think more than that, he's trying to tell them the proper story. He's trying to remind them of who they are. He's trying to ingrain in them some encouragement. You are the people of God. When we tell the right story, we get a better result. We need to be encouraging one another. The wrong story will always discourage us. The wrong thinking will always make us weaker. When I was a kid in junior high, we used to go up to a friend's place and watch scary movies all the time. And those scary movies affected me. I remember watching one, and then I went home, and for some reason I had to go out in the backyard for something at night, and suddenly our very safe, very calm, nothing going on backyard was the scariest place there was. Because the stories in my head said, there's danger everywhere, because that's what I had just been watching, and that's what I had been thinking about, and that's what then I reacted to. When you tell yourself the wrong story, you will get the wrong result. And so Paul says, I want you to be encouraged, not discouraged. I want you to think about what you are able to do, not what you're unable to do. And I think that happens in churches all the time. I think that is a real struggle for us as a group. That it's easy for us to tell the wrong story. It's easy to say we're getting smaller and people are moving away and probably nobody wants to hear anything about the Bible anymore and probably nobody cares about what we're doing and probably we're going to die. And so we tell those kinds of stories to each other and then we get discouraged and our life shrinks rather than expands. But the odd thing is, you would never do that in any other circumstance. You'd never have that conversation anywhere else, right? You wouldn't act that way. You wouldn't take your 5-year-old kid to kindergarten, their very first day of kindergarten. You wouldn't take your lovely little girl and say to her, or your little boy and say to him, "You're going to hate this. This is going to be horrible. The people in that school are terrible. You're likely going to cry all day." You would never do that. No parent does that. What do you do when you take your little kid to kindergarten? You say, "It's going to be so much fun. You're going to meet new friends. You're going to get to color things and play in the gym." And you encourage, not discourage. You tell the proper story. And so Paul tells us that that's what he wants to do too. That's one of his purposes. I want to encourage your heart. Wow, what would it be like if we had a bunch of people who just said, "That's my goal. I'm here to encourage you. I'm here to help you. I'm here to tell you a good story about yourself and about us and about what's happening." In 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and in chapter 13, the Apostle Paul writes to a group who had caused him a lot of trouble. He wrote to them and said, "I want to use my authority to encourage you, not discourage you, to build you up, not tear you down." Paul's first goal always was to encourage, to look for the good, and to tell that story. We need that same purpose. We need that same goal. We need to be those types of people. Secondly, he goes on from there, "My purpose is that they may be encouraged in heart and united in love." Again, I'm a little bit surprised by that phrase too. I think that's interesting because I was always told that unity would come when we thought alike. Unity would come when we believed the same things. That's not what this passage says. This passage says that unity will come when they love one another, that they would be united in love. That makes sense, right? Sarah and I love one another, but we certainly don't agree about everything. Agreement is not the basis of our relationship. Love is the basis of our relationship, right? Because when you love someone, you don't always have to agree about everything. Love is the unifying factor, not total agreement on everything. Let me give you a different example. Raise your hand if you think green is the best color ever. That is the best color God ever made. There might be a few of you raising your hands. What if you think blue is the best color? And I think you're wrong. Now we disagree. Now we can't be friends, right? We can't be brothers and sisters because we don't agree. That's ridiculous. But I've seen churches do similar things. One brother says, "I think this," and the other brother says, "I like that." And then they get fighting and scrapping, trying to prove who's smartest or who's right, and they start using the Bible as a weapon against each other. We will never be united that way. You can't unite around arguing. But Paul says, I want you united in love. Love is the thing that will connect us. Love is the thing that makes us care about one another. As I record this lesson, my office windows are out here and I can see people driving down the street. And you know what? I don't love any of those people right now. I don't really love any of those people in that car that just went by. Why? Because I don't know them. If they were to pull over and pull in up to the driveway of our church building and come in and I'd have a chat with them, I might actually start to like them. I might actually learn to love them. But it'd be because I know them, right? We are united when we know and love one another. And it's that knowledge of one another that is so important. When we keep each other at arm's length, which we often do in our society today, it breaks down our unity because it breaks down our knowledge of one another and therefore our love of one another. Really simple example of this, and to get this illustration you have to know what Alexa is. For those of you who don't know, Alexa is a little machine that's hooked up to the internet. It's basically a computer you can talk to, and so you can say, Alexa, tell me the weather, and it'll tell you what the weather is, right? At the start of this past school year in September, Sarah's staff at her school had a get-together, a get-to-know-you thing, and many of the staff there have been together for a lot of years, and they've known each other a long time. Some of them grew up in Estevan together even, so they know each other fairly well. I've known a lot of them for 10 or 15 years. But every year they have this gathering, and most of the time it's just kind of whatever, but we go anyway just because we want to be connected. Well, this year they decided that they were going to have, because of COVID, they couldn't go anywhere, so they would hold this party in this guy's backyard. And so one of the teachers hosted it in his backyard, and he had this great idea to bring his Alexa outside. And then he made a rule. He said, what we're going to do is we're going to go around the circle. And as you go around the circle, you've got to tell Alexa to play a song, and then you've got to tell us why you chose that song. And it was so much fun. Because people started shouting out names of songs, and then they would explain, this is the song that I heard on my first date with my wife, or this is the song we had at our graduation ceremony, or this was the song they played at my grandpa's funeral, or this is whatever. And I loved it. And guess what? I like some of those people even more now because I got to hear their stories. I got to know them better. I knew them as people from the school, but suddenly now, because they were sharing personal things, I got to know them as people, and I feel connected to them in a way now that I've never felt before. We are unified when we know and love people, and so Paul prays that they would be unified in their love. If you think I'm making too much of that, or if you think maybe I'm off just a little bit, keep your finger in Colossians chapter 2 and go with me to 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4, Peter's winding down this letter. He's writing the most important things at the end. Remember, these are written on scrolls, so we always put the important things at the start of a letter. They put it at the end because as you unrolled the scroll, the last thing you saw was the last bit of the scroll, and that's where you would stop. So the important things are at the end. He says this. He says in chapter 4, verse 8, above all else, in a list of instructions, above all else, love each other deeply. How important is it that we would actually love one another? Above all else, love each other deeply. Why? Because love covers over a multitude of sins. What does that mean? That when you really love somebody, you will go a long way with them. When you really love somebody, you will forgive them much more than if you don't know them or don't like them. You forgive your kids a lot easier than you forgive the stranger across the street, right? Because you love them. Above all else, love each other deeply because it covers a multitude of sins. It keeps us united in a time when things might blow us apart. Paul says, I want you to be united in love. One last thing to think about here. Colossians chapter 13, that great passage about love that we love so much, was written to the Corinthian church. 1 Corinthians 13 was written to the Corinthian church that caused him so much trouble, so much pain. But he writes them and says that love looks like this. It is patient, it is kind, it is not keeping a record of wrongs. He was going to maintain their unity by loving them. So, he says, I'm here to encourage. My purpose is to encourage. My second purpose is to get you to be unified in love. And then thirdly, he says, I want you to be full of wisdom and knowledge. That's his third purpose. If you go back to Colossians chapter 2, he says, I want you to know the full and complete riches of his understandings in order that you might know the mystery of God in Christ, that you might, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. In case you thought that I was sort of straying away from saying it doesn't matter what we believe, here comes the believing part. And he says, I want you to have two things here. I want you to have knowledge and wisdom. The Greek words are very different. Knowledge is the right answer. Knowledge means you can answer the question properly. The Greek word for wisdom means you know how to apply it. And so Paul says, I want you to have an understanding that is like that. That is smart enough to not only know the answer, but what to do. I want you to know what to do with the truth. That's his third purpose. And that's really important too, right? Because as you work with people, you understand that there are right answers, but there are ways to get there, and those ways are different all the time. If you have children or have worked with children, you will know that. What worked with our first daughter wouldn't work with our second daughter. And the things that worked with our second daughter would not work with our first daughter. Even though we had the same broad parameters for them, even though we had the same broad goals, the way we were going to get there was different. Because each child was different. Each person is different. So you need to know how to apply things. You need to have some wisdom. You need to know not just the answer, but what to do about it. Back in the Psalms, the very first psalm that we get is talking about this idea about knowledge and wisdom. And I like the way this is described. He describes a person that knows the right answer, but is still connected to his community and still trying to do what is right. Listen to what he says here. Psalm 1 says this: Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked. He doesn't do that, right? He doesn't stand in the way of sinners or sit in the seat of mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. So he's looking for answers. And on his law he meditates day and night. Why would you meditate on the law of God? Typically it's clear what you're supposed to do, but the meditation part is the applying part. What do I do about it? So he loves the law and he meditates on it day and night. He has knowledge and is trying to gain wisdom. Right? He's like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. He says this is the picture of a man who has both wisdom and knowledge. He has the right answer and knows what to do about it, and he tries to apply that. That man is like a tree planted by the water who continues to grow, right? And his leaf doesn't wither and he doesn't struggle because he knows the right answer and he knows what to do about it. Again, often in the church we only focus on one of those things, or at least lots of times we do. We often focus on what is right. The question we teach people to ask is what is right and wrong, right? We try and focus on answers. We want to know what's right or wrong. That's not bad. But a better question is, what is the wise thing in this situation? Right? I may know what to do. What I need to know is how to do it. That's where maturity comes in. That's where wisdom comes in. That's where strength comes in. That's where the treasures that we find in Christ, as Paul talks about, are applied. And he prays for that as well. He prays that they would have both wisdom and understanding. And so those are Paul's purposes. Those are the things he's working on. Those are the things he's trying to nurture in other people. And he says, this is my struggle. This is what I'm struggling for in you. I want you to be encouraged. I want you to be loving. And I want you to have wisdom and knowledge. I want you to know what to do and how to apply the Word of God. So, what would this look like if those were our purposes and our goals, and if that was our direction as well? What would happen? What would it be like if you went out and you were just the most encouraging person anyone had met in their whole day? What if you were the most loving person anybody had met? What if you went around sharing God's wisdom in kind ways, helping direct people and listening to them and counseling them? What would happen if we did those things? I think we'd see something amazing. I think we would have an influence on people. I think people would wonder what's going on and why are you different and how can I be part of this? We'd get some attention. But let me give you one warning here. This is not something you do just a one-time thing, right? This isn't, I'm going to go out and encourage somebody tomorrow and then forget about it forever. Or I'm going to act in a loving way now, but I don't have to do that on Tuesday. I'm going to counsel somebody and give them some advice, but I'm not going to get meddling in people's lives. It's not something you do just a little bit. In fact, the picture here is of something that is a long time investment, something we just keep doing over and over and over and over and over again with people. The picture I want you to get here is of a train. Imagine a mile-long train, and you've seen it sitting there for a while, and all of a sudden you hear the engine start to spool up, and you can hear it getting louder, and there's smoke coming out of the smokestack, and it's making a lot of noise, and all of a sudden you hear all the hitches bang together as it starts creeping forward, bam, 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 right? But you can't see it moving yet, and it gets louder and louder and louder, and then all of a sudden, just all of a little sudden, it starts going. You can barely, imperceptibly almost see it start to move. And it starts creeping along and creeping along and creeping along. And as the engine continues to work hard and pull, it creeps a little faster and a little faster and a little faster. And eventually it gets to walking speed. And eventually it gets up to 20 miles an hour. And eventually it's rolling by at 60. But it doesn't start at 60 miles an hour. It doesn't start automatically. It's a long process to get the train to start moving. Sometimes I think we forget that in the church. We do a few good things and then say, that didn't work. Well, it didn't work immediately. But it does work. We need to not just try encouraging and loving and sharing God's wisdom. We need to continually do that. That needs to be our purpose, what we are always trying to do, what we're always trying to be, the example we're always giving. Because then that train starts building some momentum. People start hearing it. People start seeing it. People can ignore it once or twice or 3 times, but they can't ignore it as you continue to encourage, as you continue to love, as you continue to instruct. They just can't keep ignoring it. It starts building some momentum until it starts rolling. And once a train starts rolling, it is really hard to stop. Jesus said that too, didn't he? He said, the kingdom looks pretty small right now. It's like a mustard seed. But once it starts to grow, it'll grow into this great big tree. It'll be amazing. You'll be amazed at what can come from the very little starting point. So brothers and sisters, can we take an example from the Apostle Paul here? Can we say, this is going to be my purpose too. I'm going to do what he did. I'm going to model myself after what he was trying to accomplish. I'm going to nurture the same sorts of things. What would it be like if you were really an encourager? What would it be like if you really loved people? What would it be like if you were really counseling them in godly wisdom? What good could God do with that? Paul said he can do anything with that. Paul delighted to see what God was doing through him. May we delight in the same results.